Tweet @TodaySOR.
And a text from Pat in Cork. So the public sector are getting pay rises and increments and allowances back. No wonder there is no money left for services or tax cuts for the private sector taxpayers. 51551 todaysor@rte.ie, or you can tweet @todaysor if you want to get in touch. The year 1847 is notorious in Irish history as Black 47, but there was a lot more going on in the world that year in addition to the tragedy of the famine in this country. In his new book 1847, A Chronicle of Genius, Generosity and Savagery, author Turtle Bunbury, so well known for his Vanishing Ireland project, brings us on a wonderful journey across the globe in a series of episodes that all take place in that stormy year. We meet rival Russian circus masters, Arctic adventurers and the Irish soldiers who fought for Mexico against the United States, among many, many others. 1847 will be launched this coming Thursday, and Turtle Bunbury joins me now in studio. Thank you indeed for coming in. What sort of pinpointed your interest or settled you in your interest in picking this particular year, 1847? Because there's not a whole lot about the famine in the book.
Well, some of the chapters inevitably are going to have the shadow of the famine on them. But for me, it was the moment when I found myself in Mexico City 15 years ago, and I was a travel writer. And I went for a walk through the suburb of San Angel and found myself standing in front of a memorial to the San Patricios, who was this battalion of mostly Irish soldiers who had fought for the Mexican army against the Americans in a war that raged through 1847. And they'd been executed on this very spot in September 1847. But the year resonated with me for a number of reasons. But my house in County Carlow, it was started in 1847. The school I went to in Scotland was established in 1847. I'd just been reading Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, which was written in 1847. So it's like the year was kind of following me a little bit.
Yes, and you refer to it, I think, in your introduction to it as the year it all began, so to speak.
Well, that is, and that also comes from Luca Bloom's song, because it was when listening to Christy Moore singing The City of Chicago, where it says 1847 was the year it all began. Deadly pains of hunger drove 1 million from our land. So, of course, it also, it was the year of Black 47, as you say. So, trying to put that in context, really, as to what else was going on around the world at that time.
Right. Yes, you do obviously refer to the famine. You talk about it being a shadow there, but no particular chapter. But there are two particular stories, famine-related, that I want to ask you about. The help given by a Native American tribe, and also help given by a person we might refer to as a Boston drug baron.
Yes, indeed. Right. Well, I mean, the story of the Choctaw Indians is a lovely story, really. They had been forced marched across the Mississippi to Oklahoma, but they were closely affiliated to two brothers who were from Enniskillen, really. And so that led to them donating $170 to Irish famine relief, and it's an extraordinary story. And then the Boston, Black Ben Forbes from Boston, who was a very prosperous merchant who had made his fortune selling opium to the Chinese in the 1830s and 1840s. He ends up commanding a US warship and bringing it all the way to Cove, stuffed with supplies, with flour and corn and so forth. And he gets to Cove, where he is given a grand tour of the county by no less a man than Father Theobald Matthew, the Apostle of Temperance. So strange worlds colliding.
Yes, and now you also mention again in the intro a French celebrity chef who set up a soup kitchens, I should say, in Dublin during the Great Famine, but you didn't have time or space to go into all of that. But just give us a flavour of what that story was about.
Well, yeah, Alexis Soyer set up soup kitchens. He was brought over from Paris to set up soup kitchens, which were a little controversial because I think the soup was almost basically a herb added to water. They weren't considered hugely nutritious, but the
Nouvelle cuisine before its time.
Indeed, yeah, exactly. It was so it was noble intentions. But there were a lot of extraordinary people put in efforts to try and help, and I have tried to convey that in 6 or 7 of the chapters in the book, and people like the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire and all sorts of people who contributed.
And people mightn't have been aware of this, although they obviously knew that there was massive emigration from this country. But the impact of the famine on, for instance, a place like Toronto was enormous.
Vast. So Toronto, at the start of 1847, population 20,000, end of the year 60,000, and most of those newcomers were from Ireland. But I mean, I think you're talking about as many as 250,000 people emigrating from Ireland in Black 47 to the UK or to Canada and down into the States.
Right, but I mean, it was that particular one was something that you focused on there. That big influx of Irish people, and again, there was people coming in the opposite direction. You mentioned the man, the drug baron, Mr. Forbes coming here, Ben Forbes, and meeting Father Matthew. But there was another distinguished visitor around about that time as well, Frederick Douglass, the great African American social reformer and human rights campaigner.
Yeah, he had an extraordinary time because he came on a grand tour of Britain and Ireland, but spent a long time in Ireland touring from Cork to Belfast, and became best friends with Daniel O'Connell, who hailed him as the Black O'Connell. And Douglas is an extraordinary man, but his voyage ends in 1847 when he kind of discovers that Daniel O'Connell has died. Because, of course, the Emancipator died in 1847 as well.
Yeah, but Douglas didn't take too well or too kindly. Maybe they suffered by comparison to the leaders who come on after, post-O'Connell.
No, he was not happy with them because a lot of them actually supported slavery, so the Young Irelanders. Whereas O'Connell was vehemently against slavery. So
now, there are some other extraordinary characters, Turtle, who appear in these pages. For instance, a tempestuous Sligo-born dancer who seduced Franz Liszt.
Well, she was the definitive man-eater, Lola Montez, she started life as Rosanna Gilbert in County Sligo, then reinvents herself as an exotic flamenco dancer and goes off to Europe and seduces Franz Liszt, the composer, Alexander Dumas, the writer, and eventually hits the jackpot and gets the King of Bavaria, and that story plays out in 1847 with disastrous consequences for poor old King Ludwig.
I can see why you might, not wholly in earnest, refer to it as the year it all began, because again, among the other topics you have there are the birth of Cartier, in jewellery.
Yes, the Cartier. Yeah, Louis-François Cartier. He sets up his jeweller's shop in Paris in 1847, and I wanted to because 1848 is obviously a year of great revolution in Europe. So I talk about that, the tensions through people like Cartier and also Edward Lear, the nonsense poet who was travelling through Sicily and Italy just to get their take on it.
And then from the world of entertainment, General Tom Thumb and the Prince of Humbugs featured.
General Tom Thumb, who was a 2-foot guy from Connecticut, who happened to be a cousin of P.T. Barnum of Barnum and Bailey's Circus. There's a sucker born every minute. And once Barnum learnt that he had a cousin who was only 2 foot tall, he took him on a grand tour of Europe, and they performed before 5 million people, which culminated again in 1847 before they went home and carried on touring in the States.
And then there was the girl who liked dinosaurs.
Dear Mary Anning, yes, I feel very sorry for Mary Anning. She was this is before the word dinosaur hadn't even been invented at this time, and Mary Anning was going along the coast of England and digging out endless skeletons of what people thought were dragons, but she knew to be what we now call dinosaurs. So a remarkable woman herself. If I can just say that one of the things about this is that it is 170 years ago. It seems a long time ago, but it's not that long ago. It's only 2 85-year-olds ago. And I learned about this when I was doing the Vanishing Ireland project, because a lot of the people I interviewed, it turned out that their grandparents were children, if not teenagers, at the time of the famine. So really our connection to an event that seems so alien to us is not long ago, and the impact is still, from not just the famine, but from a lot of other
point
events.
Well made. I suspect, our grandparents, parents or grandparents would have had memories of the famine.
100%, yeah, definitely. So that just brings it close. History plays tricks on us sometimes.
And again, it's an extraordinary collection of individuals. But and something again you identified back in the United States: Mormons on the march.
Well, this was the big year for the Mormons. And again, in a part because of all the new arrivals into America from Ireland and elsewhere, there is a push to the west. And the Mormons are driven out of Illinois, and they make their massive march. And they found Salt Lake City, Utah in 1847. And that's a big year in Mormon history. It's the biggest year for them. Yes,
you mentioned about that Christy Moore song, written, of course, by Luca Bloom, The City of Chicago. And there is a connection with the launch as well, isn't there?
Yeah, Luca is amazingly going to perform at the launch, which is a wonderful synergy for me and for the book. It's tremendous.
Right, and look, it's published by Gill. Something for everybody there, I suspect. But I presume the reason that you said it was 15 years ago you stood in that spot in Mexico and said, I have to write this book. You've I suppose, had something of a scenic route getting to publication, but it's not as though you hadn't been busy with the Vanishing Ireland
Well, with
series.
lots of other projects, exactly. But this has always been lurking in the background, and it is wonderful to finally now see 1847 in print. It's amazing.
Okay, the book published by Gill, 1847, called simply. It's by Turtle Bunbury, and it is selling for, I didn't take note of the price.
20 euros.
Anyway, it's a fine sort of, I suppose you call it a mustard colour on it. Turtle, thank you so much indeed for coming in. We'll be hearing about a school in North County Dublin where they are top of the class internationally on science. That from Evelyn O'Rourke after this short break.
Today with Sean O'Rourke on RTE Radio 1.